Hello and welcome to another war game review. Today we're looking at Twilight Struggle from GMT Games. Twilight Struggle is a very well-known and popular card-driven game, strategy slash war game that will explore the Cold War in its entireness from 1945 to 1989. The edition that I have here is the 2015 deluxe edition. There have been many reprints of this game because, like I said, it's a pretty popular game. The editions are more or less all the same, but obviously the deluxe edition has this mounted map that you see here. Um, Essentially, we're gonna take a look at the components. Then I will explain how the game works, and finally the review. Uh, the game, in terms of components, the game comes with a rule book, typical GMT rule book. It's mostly black and white. It does have some examples and some things in there in color. So these examples are very nice in color. The game, uh, the rule book essentially explains uh, the rules in detail, all the different phases, what you can do, what you can't do. Then it gets through, and this is about I want to say about 10 pages of rules, including setup. Then there's also a page dedicated to tournament play rules, a variant which is the Chinese Civil War, and then in another scenario here on page 12, which is a late war scenario, and then starting on page 13, you've got an extended example of play, which is a nice way to get into the game besides just reading the rule book. If you play through this extended example, you'll get a feeling of how the game works. And then, very interesting, on page 20, you have the card history. So each of the cards on this game represents an event that happened during the Cold War, and here you have an explanation of each and every of those cards. And essentially, if you're curious about the Cold War, if you're interested on the theme of this game, this will give you an idea of what these events were. So ultimately, you get a lesson in history besides just playing the game. Some designer notes here at the end, and then some credits and some designer optional rules on realignment rules, the space race, etc. Besides this, the game also comes with two player aids. So one of the player aids, so two of the player aids that are exactly the same, thick cards. They explain essentially all the rules in a nutshell. And on the other side, there's a full card list, and like I said, two player aids, one for each player, and this is what you get in terms of rule book and player aids. And then you get the board, which you see here. The board is, like I said, a mounted board, and it shows the entire planet, the entire world. Um, and essentially, it's very colorful. It's very easy to look at. I think it's a great looking map. It divides the world into a series of regions. So here you have Central America. Here you have South America, Africa, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, and Southeast Asia. Very easy to tell the regions apart. The countries are connected, or countries are the regions, because in some cases you have countries like here you have Angola, Botswana, but in some cases you actually have an agglomeration of countries. So, for example, the uh, southeastern African states, or Spain and Portugal on the same region, Benelux, etc. So, and you see here there are connections between the different countries, which show you where, essentially, I will explain in a bit, but where you can place influence. What countries are effectively neighbors? So, like Iran neighbors Afghanistan and Pakistan. Pakistan neighbors India, but Afghanistan does not neighbor India because there's no connection there. Um, then the game also comes with a couple of dice, red die for the U.S. player, sorry, for the Russian player, and blue die for the U.S. player. We've got a DEFCON status track here, which I'll explain in a second. Required military operations track, the victory point track, which at 20, as you can see here, gives USSR victory, and at 20 blue gives US victory, the VP token. You get the space racetrack, and you get the turn record track, which shows you what round, what turn you're on, and how many action rounds you're going to have, and what type of cards will be in play. And also the action round track, which will track with this token. It will track whether it's the Russians' turn or the U.S. turn to play, and you advance as you play the rounds. Yeah, so like I said, a very nice looking map. Probably one of the nicest looking maps I've seen in a war game. And and I almost forgot, but the game also comes. I actually almost forgot that the bulk of the game is done through these counters. So these are Soviet counters in red, blue counters for the US. And the counters all have a number from 1 to 5. And they have two sides. They have this side, which is the light side, which means that there's influence. These are influence tokens. It means that there's influence, but no domination, no control, sorry. And on this side, this indicates that you control the country. Same with the red tokens. Red token on this side and on this side. Right. Then this is a card-driven game, so no surprise. The game comes with a pack of cards. The cards are in basically they're nice cards. I've sleeved them, but they're nice thick cards. They come in three different types of cards. There's the mid-war cards, as indicated here. There's the late war cards, and there's the early war cards. The cards also come in three types. This is cards that have the red symbol here are Russian cards. These cards that have neither are neutral cards, and the cards that have the blue star are the American cards. So how does the game play, and why is there so much hype around this game? So as mentioned, this is a card-driven game that simulates the entirety of the Cold War. One player is going to be the USA, the other player is going to be the Soviet Union. These are two superpowers, and throughout different rounds, turns and rounds, you're going to exert influence. You're going to place influence into these different countries. You're gonna do coups. You're gonna do realignment rolls, and you're gonna play events to try to get most of the world to support your ideology. The objective of the game is to have the most victory points at the end. And the way this works is this victory point track. If the Soviets get up, let's say 2 points, this moves in the left direction, this way towards the USSR. If the US gets, let's say, 3 points, this moves towards the US, and then there's kind of a tug of war here where the VP marker will move towards the Soviets and towards the US. The player at the end of the game with the most points wins, but if at any point one of the players gets 20 points during the game, they will win the game immediately. There's also if there is a scoring phase, which I'll explain in a second, and one of the player controls Europe, they win. And the other way to win is if one of the player triggers nuclear war by moving the DEFCON status to its lowest value. So these are the ways the game works. Obviously, at the end of the game, there's going to be 10 turns. Whoever has the most points wins. So how does the game play? So essentially, there's a bunch of phases, and the first phase, which you will always do except during the first round, is you will increase the DEFCON status. Essentially, the DEFCON status is going to be moved downwards, and at the end of the round, it's going to be moved one. So let's say you finished the turn, and DEFCON was at 2. Starting next turn, you're going to move. So let's say you're going to start the next turn here. You're going to move DEFCON up by 1. What does DEFCON indicate? DEFCON indicates the danger of nuclear war. Um, and essentially, it also indicates where you can do the so-called coups, which are attempts to overthrow governments. So at number 5, you can do a coup anywhere. At number 4, you can't do a coup or realignment rules in Europe. At number 3, Europe and Asia are out of reach. At 2, you can't do coups in Europe, Asia, or the Middle East. There's a bunch of cards that will enable you to manipulate this DEFCON status that can go up or down, and and but typically the way DEFCON goes down is when you do a coup in a so-called battleground state. You will notice that there's some states, and I'm going to just zoom in a little bit. There are some states that have a red number here. Other states have a yellow number. The states that have a red number are the so-called battleground states, which means that they're more important in the game. And if you do a coup there, DEFCON will immediately go down. If you do a coup on the other states, nothing will happen. Well, there will be a coup, but DEFCON doesn't go down. Then you're going to deal cards to the players, and the number of cards is going to increase as you move from early war to mid war, and the number of action rounds will also increase. So in the beginning, in early war, the first 3 turns, you're going to have 6 action rounds. Mid war, you're going to have 7 action rounds, and then in the late war, you're going to have also 7 action rounds. So the cards, you're going to deal the cards. And the interesting thing about this game is that unlike some other card-driven games, on this game, the deck is just one deck. It's a common deck, and you're going to take cards from that deck, and you might get your own cards, you might get neutral cards, or you might get your opponent's cards. In the beginning, players play with a deck composed of only the early war. Then at some point when you move into turn 4, the mid-war cards are included on the deck. And then late war, the late war cards are included on the deck. So as you progress through the war, more powerful cards are added, more impactful cards are added, and the deck becomes bigger. In terms of the cards, essentially, and let me get here a couple of one for each player. Yeah. So for example, let's say that you get these 2 cards on your hand. The cards, the way the card works is you can play the card for its event, which is whatever is written here, or you can play the card for its ops points here. So in this case 2, in this case 4. If you are the American player and you have this cards, like I said, you can play it for the event, and you trigger the event. You do whatever the event says. So in this case, it says the Voice of America. You remove 4 USSR influence from non-European countries. No more than 2 may be removed from any country. So you do that. Or you play it for the ops point, and I'll explain what the ops points do. But essentially, you can't do both. And if you're the Soviet player, exactly the same. So you can play this card, Muslim Revolution, for either its 4 ups points or for the event. The event says remove all US influence in 2 of the following countries: Sudan, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, etc. Now, because these are shared decks, it might happen that you're the US player and you get these 2 cards, or you're the Soviet player and you get these 2 cards. So what happens if you play this card, which is your opponent's card? If you play this card for its ops points, you can't play it for the event because the event is not yours. You play it for the ops points. You declare, I'm playing this card. This is a Soviet card, and I'm the US player. I'm going to play it for its points. And then the event will trigger, which will always favor your opponent. You can decide whether to trigger the event before or after you use the points, but the event will trigger. And the same if you're the Russian player and you have this US card. This is the most interesting, for me, this is the most interesting aspect of the game because quite simply, there will be rounds where, well, I would say in almost all the rounds, you will get stuck with your opponent's cards and you will have to make the best possible decisions with those cards in your hand. There are ways to mitigate your opponent's cards. There's certainly events that aren't there are context driven, that are important at certain points and not so much at others, and you really don't care about them. Or if you are forced to play a card and you have two of your opponent's events in your hand, and you need to play one of those two, um, essentially you need to make a decision as to whether which one is the least harmful for you. And this is a big point of this game. It's mitigating the fact that you are having your events and your opponent's events, and you need to mitigate for that. But your opponent needs to do the same. A couple of other things on the cards are these cards that have an asterisk, as you can see here after the event. If they are played for the event, the card is immediately removed from the game. It says here at the bottom, removed from play if used as an event. So this card will never come into play again. Whereas these two cards that I showed before don't have an asterisk. So if you play them for the event, or if the event gets triggered, they just go into the discard pile, and then eventually they'll get, as you cycle through the deck, they'll get shuffled back in, and these cards will come back. That's also something that you need to bear in mind. And then there are these cards. For example, this card is called Quagmire. This is USSR card, and it has an asterisk, so it will be removed from the game. But it's also underlined. The event name is underlined. This means that the card has a persistent effect. The card will stay in play until something happens. There's other things. There's cards that have an effect in early or mid-war turns and have other effects in late war turns. So that's also an interesting strategic element. Basically, the bulk of the game is playing cards. We're gonna have a hand of cards, and we're gonna play these cards back and forth between the two players. Now, there's a couple of other types of cards. One is the scoring cards. These cards look completely different from the other ones. They don't have a photo. They don't have an event. I have two of them here. One is the Asia scoring card. The other one is the Central America card. And these cards say at the bottom, may not be held, which means that typically, if you have a hand of cards, let's say you have 7 cards, you play 6 rounds, so you're going to keep a round at the end. You're going to keep a card at the end, or 8 cards, and you're going to keep a card at the end. But these cards cannot be held. You need to play them during your turn, and this will trigger scoring for both players, which I will explain in a second. And then the only other cards that is a bit different is and obviously the cards, players will have an advantage if they know the decks better than the other player. But there's another card which I'm just searching in the meantime, which is called the China card, which is a bit different because when the card is played, and this abstracts a little bit the role of China in the Cold War. When the card is played, it actually goes, it produces its effect, and it goes to your opponent, and it's a card that gives you 1 point at the end of the game for whatever player has it. So this is the card. It's called the China card. The card starts with USSR player. It gives four ops points. It gives +1 ops points if all the points are used in Asia, so 5 points if it's used in Asia, and it gives 1 VP for whoever is holding this at the end of the game. When I play this card, I immediately give it face down to my opponent, and then in the next round, my opponent will flip it up and might play it or not. And the card doesn't count towards your hand limit. So it's another option, but when you play it, you're giving it to your opponent, so you need to be careful with that. Like I mentioned, you increase DEFCON status as you begin the game, and then you deal the cards, and then there's the so-called headline phase. In the headline phase, each player will secretly choose a card, and then they will reveal it simultaneously, and the card will be triggered for its event. So it's not triggered for its ops. It's triggered for its event. And let's say that both players have. This is the U.S. player. This is the Russian player. They've selected these cards. They reveal them, and there are two different events here. This the U.S. player card would go first because it's a 4 point. It's 4 points, and this one is a 3 point card. So the U.S. player does whatever the event says here. So in this case, it's player earns VP is equal to current DEFCON level -2, then improved DEFCON level 2, the DEFCON 2 levels, and then the Russian player would play de-Stalinization for its event. And because it has an asterisk, like I mentioned, the game would be the card would be removed from the game. The if there's a tie, by the way, the U.S. player plays first. And you can play scoring cards during this phase. Scoring cards. So after you play the headline, you're gonna play an action rounds. And action rounds are the bulk of the game. Like I said in the beginning, if you're an early war, you're gonna play 6 action rounds. Then later you're gonna play 7, and the action rounds are tracked here. The Russians always go first. So regardless of whatever happens, the Russians always go first. They're gonna play the first round. Then it's gonna flip to the U.S. Then we go to the second round, Soviets. It's going to flip to the U.S. and so forth. You see, this is just an action round marker. One side U.S., one side Russia. And how do these rounds work? Essentially, you will play one card from your hand, and you will choose an action with that card. As mentioned, if the card contains your opponent's event, the event will get triggered. You can do the action before or after the event gets triggered. You decide that. But essentially, it does matter. Essentially, you're gonna use the card for a bunch of different things. The first thing that you can do is you can just say, as mentioned, I'll use it for the event. You read the event out loud, and you do whatever the event does. If there's an asterisk, the card goes out of the game. If you don't want to do that, you can say that you use the card for its ops points. The ops points. So in this case, bear in mind, this is a 3 ops points card. So with 3 ops points, you can do the first thing that you can do is you can place influence. Influence, you can place. So in this case, you can place 3 points of influence. So 3 points of influence. I've got 3 points of influence here. Oops, 1 and 2 for the Soviets, and you can place influence on the map wherever you want with a given rule. You can only place influence in countries that are adjacent to where you already have influence at the beginning of your round. So, for example, I'm here in Iraq. I've got 1 point in Iraq, so I can place 2 points on the Gulf states, and I can place 1 point in Jordan, for example. Or I can place 2 points in Jordan and 1 point on the Gulf states. Or I can just place 3 points in Gulf states or whatever. I'm not forced to play on this region, so essentially I could play 1 point on the Gulf states, and I could play, for example, 2 points here on West Germany. The rule is that, for example, I'm here in, and I'm just gonna zoom in a little bit. I'm here in Iraq, and I've got a point here, and I have a point at the beginning of the turn, and I'm going to place this point here in Jordan. My first point is placed in Jordan. As you can see, there's a connection between Iraq and Jordan. Let's say I don't have a point here, or where I cannot play is in Israel, because at the beginning of even though there's a connection here, at the beginning of the turn, I have points in no neighbor regions of Israel. So I don't have a point in Syria. I don't have a point in Lebanon. I do have a point in Jordan now, but I didn't have it at the beginning of the turn, and I have no points in Egypt. Now, what I can do is, so I could place a point here, for example. I can place points somewhere else. I'm not forced to play on the same region as mentioned, so I can play in Asia. I can play wherever. But at the beginning of the next turn, if I choose to place influence again, or in my subsequent turns, because now at the beginning of that round I have I have influence in countries that are adjacent to Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan. I can place influence in Israel. And I can place influence even if my opponent has influence there. I can add influence to places where I already have influence, and so forth. Influence is the main, one of, I would say, the main driver of the game, because you want to influence countries as much as possible. And at some point, you've probably seen here that the countries have a number as mentioned. So Iraq has 3, Iran has 2, Jordan has 2. If I have enough influence to meet this number minus the number that my opponent has in terms of influence there, I control the country. So I'll give you an example. The example is East Germany. In East Germany, the influence is 3. I have three influence. Sorry, the stability. This is the stability of the country is 3. I have 3 influence. So I control this country. And I denote this by flipping the light side to the darker side. This means that I control East Germany. If my opponent had a point here, let's say like this, I do not control Germany because, so I would put it like this. The reason why I don't control Germany is because I have 3 influence points. The US has 1. 3 minus 1 is 2. And the stability is 3. So I need 1 more point. So if I add here another influence point, and then it's 4 to 1, 4 minus 1, 3, it's equal to stability, equal or higher, I control that country. Also, it's interesting to note that, for example, if the US wants to place a point here, because East Germany is under Russian control, to place a point, this will cost me 2 ops. So this would effectively remove the control from East Germany, but this point, because East Germany was controlled by the Russians, costs me 2 ops points. And then if I want to place more points, because it's no longer under control, every subsequent point that I add doesn't cost me 2 points. So if let's say I had 3 ops, let's say the beginning is like this. I had, and let's assume I had influence here because I need to have influence next to East Germany. I had influence somewhere that is adjacent. Let's assume that. East Germany is under Russian control. I have 3 ops from a card. I spend the first point, which costs 2. I place the first influence, costs 2 points. So it's now like this. And if I want to place another influence point, then so it would be 2, 3. I'm just going to put a 1, 1 here, but it's a 2. 2, 3, then it only costs me 1 ops point. So this cost me a total of 3 ops points just to get into East Germany. So this is how influence works in a nutshell. And you're going to go back and forth controlling these countries. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can do a coup on countries. And as mentioned, countries that have a red number are battleground states. So if you do a coup there, DEFCON is going to go down, and DEFCON will indicate where you can do the coups. And essentially, you're going to do a coup. You're going to play a card. So let's say same card as before. I'm going to say I'm going to use the 3 ops to do a coup, and I indicate where I'm going to do the coup. In order to do a coup, you need to have at least 1 point of your opponent's. Your opponent needs to have some influence there. So the way this works is, let's do a coup in Iran. I've declared that I'm doing a coup on Iran, which currently has 1 influence point from the US. I'm the Russian player. DEFCON is going to go down. It's going to go down to 2. So we can't do more. If a player does another coup in a battleground state, this will go to nuclear war. That player loses the game, so we don't want that. But I've reduced DEFCON from 3 to 2, and I'm going to do a coup in Iran. As mentioned, I'm going to do a coup with 3 points, and the defense against the coup is double the number here. So in this case, Iran has 2 stability. 2 times 2 is 4. So Iran will defend from the coup with 4. So we're going to do a coup against Iran. And Iran, as you can see, has 1 US influence, has 2 of stability. So 2 times 2, 4. And I'm attacking with 3. But to that, I will add a die. So I will roll my die, and I will add. It's a normal d6 die, and I will add whatever comes out to my points, my 3 points from the card. So I rolled a 6. That's pretty good. I rolled a 6. So 6 plus 3 is 9. The country has a stability of 2, so it is defending with 4. 9 minus 4 is 5. So I get the coup was successful by 5 points. What this means is that not only the first point of success will see the removal of the US influence in Iran, and then I still have 4 points left. With those 4 points, I'm going to place 4 points of Soviet influence on Iran, and I'm going to place it with this side facing up because basically it's controlled by the Soviets. 4 points is control and against the 2 points of stability. So we started by having 1 point, if you remember, started by having 1 point of US influence. There was a massively successful coup, and now the country is dominated by Iran, and well dominated. Against the stability of 2, I have an influence of 4, so it's going to be hard for the US player to seize back control. So this is a coup, and then the other and by the way, this is all very well explained here on the guide. The other action that you can do, and I'll just quickly go through it, is a realignment roll. Realignment roll is to reduce the enemy influence of a country. So you choose, let's say, again, you have this card, 3 ops points, and you say, I'm going to use these 3 ops points for realignment rolls. You don't have to use them all on the same country, so you can use different countries or on the same country as you prefer. And you are going to you're going to declare, I'm going to use the first realignment roll in country X, second realignment roll, etc. You do it one by one so you can see if they're successful or not. And each player is going to roll a die, so both players roll their dice. And you're going to add some modifiers. So modifiers are going to be +1 for each controlled adjacent country, +1 if adjacent to the rolling player's superpower, and +1 if the rolling player has more influence in the target country than the opponent. And basically, you're gonna, the high roller may remove the difference between the rolls from the opponent's influence in a target country. So basically, the realignment roll is a bit like a coup, but it's a coup. It's a sort of coup that you do in a place where you know that you've got the country surrounded, or you've got more influence than your opponent, and you know that those dice modifiers are gonna be good for you. The final thing that you can do with a card is you can play it on the space race track, which is this track over here. The space race track basically indicates, as the name implies, as the space race between the U.S. and the Soviets. You've got here two chits, one for the Soviets, one for the U.S. And you can play a card. You can say, I'm going to play this card on the space race. The card needs to have a number of minimum number of ops. So in this case, 2, 2, 2, 2, and 3, 3, 3, 4 ops. And you're going to roll, and the success is whatever is written below. So in this case, let's say the Soviets have played this de-Stalinization card, which is 3 ops, so it's enough for the 2 ops, and I need to roll a 1 to 3. I rolled a 2, so this was successful. The Soviets move here, and they get something. The something in this space is they get 2 points. The first player to get here gets 2 points. Second player will get 1 point. And then as you move up the space race, you will get other things. So for example, this one says that you may play 2 space race cards per turn. Opponent chooses and shows the headline card first. You may discard 1 held card, etc., etc. The big advantage of the space race, besides these benefits that you get, is that essentially you're throwing away a card from your hand without having to trigger its event. So, for example, if I'm the US player and I'm stuck with this card on my hand, I don't want to play it. I don't want to keep it for the next turn because it's going to be for next round, next turn, sorry, because it's going to be just a bad card on my hand. So I'll play it on the Space Race. Even if I don't get the roll that I need, at least I will get rid of this card. This card will be discarded, and it will not trigger the event. So this is the best way in the game to kind of avoid having to play your opponent's events, and this is part of your decision making because normally until you hit the space where you can play two cards, Space Race cards per turn, you can only play one. So you need to basically manage your deck. Then the other thing is you're gonna at the end of the round you're gonna check how many military ops points you have. For each coup that you do, you're gonna advance here on the track a number of points of military ops points. So for example, when I did the coup in Iran, I used the card, and again it's always the same card, but I used this card for its 3 ops points. Regardless of whether the coup is successful or not, and we saw the coup was wildly successful in Iran, I get that number of ops points in the required military ops. So I get 3 points. And at the end of the turn, we're going to compare the DEFCON number with the number of military points that the players have. The DEFCON number will tell us how many military points you need to how many military points you require to meet this requirement. So let's say that it ends the round like this. DEFCON is at 2. USSR is here with 3 military points. US is here with 0. The US have 3 points. 3 is higher than 2. They're fine. The US didn't do anything. They have 0. 0 is less than 2. That's 2. What happens is these 2 are VP losses for the US. So the US loses 2 VP points. You can see here, the US moves here, loses 2 VP points. Then that's pretty much the game. You advance the turn marker. You're gonna give cards again. If you had any cards on your hand, you will keep that card or those cards for the next turn, so you don't get to discard them unless you have something special. But you don't get to discard them. So if you held on to your opponent's cards, some of your opponent's cards, you still have those cards. And then there's going to be at the end of turn 10, there's going to be scoring. You're going to score all the regions one by one. But this is a good segue into mentioning how scoring works, and we're going to look here at and again, this is all here on the player rate. But we're going to look at this card, for example, which is the Asia scoring card. It says both sides score presence 3, domination 7, control 9, etc. How does this work? So presence means that you need to control one or more countries in the region. You just need to control one or more countries in the region to have presence, so that should be pretty easy. Domination, 7 points, means that you control more countries and more battleground countries in that region than your opponent. You need to control at least one battleground and one non-battleground. So let's say that the US player has presence in Asia, they get 3 points, and let's say that the Soviet player has domination in Asia, and they get 7 points. 7 minus 3 is 4. So in this case, the Soviet player will get 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then control which gives 9 points in this case. Control means that you need to control more countries, and you need to control all the battleground countries in that region, so that's harder to obtain. And then you also get plus extra point for any controlled battleground country in the region, and you get plus 1 VP if you control a country that is adjacent to the superpower, to your enemy's superpower. So for example, if the US player controls North Korea is adjacent to the USSR, the US player would get 1 VP. So this is the game in a nutshell. And by the way, different regions have different points. So for example, let's say in Europe you get 7 points for domination, Asia 7 points for domination, Middle East you only get 5 points for domination, Africa you only get 4 points for domination, Central America 3 points for domination, South America 5 points for domination. So each region has its own different importance. And what I've learned in this game is that really you can't disregard a region. You can't specialize in just three or four regions. You need to play in all of them, or else your opponent is gonna thrash you when those scoring cards come around. So this is the game in a nutshell. And what do I think about the game? I think it's no surprise after all of this that I'm gonna say that it's one of my favorite all time games. The game comes. It's a very easy to learn game. So I basically just explained, I think, almost all the rules. I might have forgotten something, but it's a game that you can play with friends of yours that are in diehard war games, and it's a good segue into other types of war games because this is a CDG. It's a card-driven game. If you learn the basics of this game, then you can get your friends or you yourself. You can go on to play other war game CDGs which are a bit more complex, like Paths of Glory or Washington's War, but that have the same mechanism of CDG. Um, then what I also like very much about the game is that there's a history lesson here. All the events are super interesting. Um, Glasnost, you've got Gorbachev there, South African unrest, Ortega is elected in Nicaragua, the Brezhnev Doctrine, the Iron Lady, so Margaret Thatcher, um, Reagan bombs Libya. All of these are UN intervention. Salvador Allende in Chile. All of these are very interesting cards and events. And it really, what I'm trying to say here is that the theme of the game really shines through. This is a highly thematic game. Um, what I love about the game is the tug of war that you have here, where you place influence and then your opponent places influence, and you want to place influence everywhere, but you really can't. And you need the game is all about decisions and managing your hand. Managing your hand is, you're gonna have to play an X number of rounds. You look at the cards that you have. Which cards are you gonna use to play for events? Which ones are you gonna use? Which one are you going to headline with? Which ones are you going to use for ops points? Ops points, is it going to be a coup here? Is it going to be to place influence there? Realignment roles? What card or cards you don't want to play and you can get rid of in the space race? But then you want to get rid of three cards on the space race, but you actually can't. You can only get rid of one, so you need to play two cards, which are going to be bad for you. Which ones are the least worst cards that you can afford to play, triggering your opponent's event? It's all about card management, your hand management. It's an excellent system for painful decisions. And there's a tug of war, just a very interesting tug of war. Where you're going to conquer some countries, your opponent's going to come back. They're going to hit. You're doing so well here in Europe, and all of a sudden, your opponent does a coup in Pakistan, and they take over Pakistan, and and then you try to come back into Pakistan, and they're going to go at it in Brazil or whatever. So you're trying to cover the different regions and the different countries, and your opponent is going to try to do the same, and there's some back and forth. Um, I think it's a game also that's quite easy to play. Components are excellent. You can probably play this game in about, I'm going to say, 2 hours between experienced players. And overall, it's an excellent game. What are some of the things that perhaps are turnoffs in this game? I think um, I think a couple of things might be a question mark for some players. Certainly not for me, but for some players out there. The first one is the theme, the Cold War theme. If you're not interested in the Cold War theme, if you're not interested in looking at cards like the Camp David Accords, um, or others, Lone Gunman, Soviet Shootdown, Cal 007, Solidarity, Solidarnosc in Poland. If you're not interested about these events, then you're not going to be interested in the game. And a lot of war gamers prefer, the typical army versus army, whether it's World War II, World War One, ancients, Napoleonics, etc. They prefer armies going at it against each other. This game obviously has no armies. You're not moving troops. You're not moving armies. You're placing influence. You're doing coups. coups. You're kind of using proxy wars, and you never engage directly against your opponent in the field of battle, because this is what the Cold War was. And if the theme is good for you, or if you want to learn more about the theme, then it's an incredible game. If you're not at all interested in the theme, you are not going to like this game, because I think you can see from all of this that this is a highly thematic game. The other thing that might put some players off is if you're used to Euro games or to some lighter thematic games, this is going to seem like a step up in complexity. And more than that, this is a game that punishes or rewards experienced players and punishes more newbie players, because an experienced player will know certain strategies and what's on the deck, and they know this card is still out there. Oh, the card that allows the US to take control of Japan, or the card that elects Fidel Castro in Cuba. An experienced player knows that those cards are coming, knows what cards are missing, etc. A new player has no idea. And so if two players are at the same level, this is a highly exciting game, probably going to go down to the wire. But if one of the players is highly experienced and the other one is not, then it's going to be a beatdown. And I recently introduced a friend of mine to this game, and I've played this many times. And even though I was taking it easy, my friend did a series of mistakes that led to nuclear war, and they lost in 4 rounds. 4 rounds out of 10, so 4 turns out of 10. So the game was pretty quick, and he wasn't pleased. So again, the game needs to be played between players of the similar experience levels. With all of this said, how do I rate this game? No surprise there. From 0 to 10, I rate it as a 9.5. Highly recommended. The only reason why I don't give it a 10 is because I've played it so many times that some of the novelty has worn off. But this is a game that it's in my collection, and from time to time I will come back to it and I will play, and it feels so rewarding. 9.5, highly recommended. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.